Well, howdy. Welcome to another section of the SWE Fellows Technical Track. How many of you been to SWE Fellows Technical Track sessions, not including the lightning session? Okay, so we'll go through a little spiel again. Some of you will have heard it. The SWE Fellows realized, well, at least two of us especially, Judy Forbes and I are co-chairs, and Virginia Counts, I don't see yet, is really, Virginia did the technical lifting on scheduling the sessions for this technical track. Before the conference 2 years ago, Judy and I just realized, and a lot of the other fellows were just kind of disenamored of SWE conferences, because I remember back in the 70s, and a lot of folks remember back in the early 80s, most of the content of SWE conferences, or conventions, they were called conventions then, most of the SWE convention content was technical. And it was really, really fun. It was like a technical candy store of sessions going to and unique to SWE because every discipline is represented, and you can see a talk on highway engineering and packaging engineering. Did you know packaging engineering is a thing, and recycling, and I just remember all these fabulous talks and learning all this stuff that I don't see at AIAA conferences, for instance. So a lot of us hungered for that, and Judy and I decided to take action and do some pushing and fighting and shoving and nagging and whatever else it took to get this SWE Fellows technical track established. I don't know, what did we have, half a day or a day established 2 years ago. Last year I think we might have had a day and a half, and this year we actually have the full 3 days. We're getting a lot of feedback, thanks to those of you who have fed back to us. If you can get information to conference organizers in SWE headquarters, whoever you can influence that technical programming is fun and you like it, and that you'd like to see more of that at SWE conferences, then that will help us tell the convention or the conference organizers what the membership wants in a SWE conference. It appears, look at this audience, you want some technical content. So we're fighting the good fight to keep that going for you. So that's kind of where this technical track comes from. Our speaker right now is Siobhan. I love the name, Siobhan Albright, and you can see what she's talking about. I'm not going to take any more of her time, and enjoy the presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thanks. Hi everyone. My name is Siobhan Albright. I'm the Chief Technologist for Print Security at HP. I've been working at HP for over 30 years, long timer here, and I've got about 10 plus years working in cybersecurity, and I'm excited to be here to talk about cybersecurity and the threat of IoTs. Why don't we jump right into it? So one of the things that we highlight, cybersecurity is a disruptive force. Okay, the worldwide cybercrime is actually up to $6 trillion. They're expected to be in 2021. Big dollars that are at risk here. That's about a third of the U.S. National debt, but anyway, it's still a big number, right? Okay, so the average cost of a cybersecurity breach now reaches about 3.6. I mean, Sony had spent about 20 million on theirs, 20 million plus. 3.6 is about the average. And then the third one I want to highlight, and how many people here are still in college? Okay, oh, perfect.
Yes, thank you. I forgot.
Lots of, good. This one I want to highlight to you guys, okay? There are unfilled cybersecurity jobs today, and they are expected to triple to 3.5 million by 2021. Okay, this is a green field for people that get trained around cybersecurity, and even some people that are out of college. There are training classes you can go to that are offered at universities or offered by other security companies that provide really good training that you can get certified in. So the jobs are out there, and it's very difficult to find them. Find people that are skilled in this area. I have to tell you, at HP, we've had issues trying to find penetration testers, okay? We could not find skilled penetration testers, so what we ended up doing is we put our devices, our printers, into what is called a bug bounty program. What's a bug bounty program? That's where you pay people to find vulnerabilities in your products we were paying up to $10,000 per vulnerability if it was a critical vulnerability. And we pay them because it's difficult to find the skilled testers that are required for testing these products. So it gives HP a benefit by doing a bug bounty program because we get our products out there. We like to get them tested by various skilled penetration testers to find those vulnerabilities before the unethical hackers find them and use them to attack our customers. So again, big opportunity in cybersecurity. The other piece that I want to highlight here, this is something we tell our customers all the time. I go fly across the world, across the nation, to do presentations on cybersecurity for our printers. So I will do a couple of shameless plugs on it during my presentation, but I really want to highlight what's expected in IoT devices, okay? But what we tell our customers is that it is not a matter of if, but when you will be attacked by criminals with malware, and just cybersecurity is out there, and we need to do everything we can to protect those devices. But it's not a matter of if, but when you will be attacked, essentially. So this is from an NSA presentation that was done at RSA. RSA is a security conference in San Francisco that's done every year. It's around February timeframe. And what they found, and well, this data might be a little dated, 2017. It is really appropriate around IoTs. 93% of 2017 incidents were preventable with best practices, okay? That was across the board for servers, routers, switches, any device you have on your network. But what we see today is that it's still occurring with IoTs. Best practices applied to IoTs could prevent some of these attacks. The other highlighted one on the bottom is around cybersecurity incidents, and are typically due to human error. And I was amazed at this number, 90%. Now this is either maliciously or accidentally, right? Someone not knowing how to follow the rules, or some disgruntled employee that wanted to get back at the company. So that's a really high number, and those things that there are ways to mitigate those types of risks. So moving forward, I wanted to talk about what the threat attack vectors are that are out there, why this is a scary space. So, we've got, in 2019, these are the threat vectors that we're seeing. These are the trends we're seeing, okay? Typically in the past, you would have attacks on, office applications, application software. What we're seeing is an increase in attacks on the firmware. Firmware is the lower level of a device. It's typically the BIOS. What is the BIOS? That's the first thing that runs on a device that loads the drivers so that the operating system and the applications can communicate with the drivers. We're seeing an increase going lower in the stack of these devices, and what that means is it's more difficult to detect those types of attacks. And I'll share one with you that we saw recently. We are seeing rapid evolution of malware. We're seeing permutations and variants in malware that are getting highly intelligent in escaping detection with the standard antivirus scanners. In fact, antivirus scanners, most of you guys have them running, Defender on Windows and, Norton, McAfee. There's a lot of antivirus scanners. They are unable to catch zero-day attacks. What are zero-day attacks? Those are attacks that we have not seen in the past, okay? So I'm going to share what we need to do to catch those types of attacks and be very proactive around that. And we're also seeing a rise of destructive attacks. What are destructive attacks? How many of you guys have heard of ransomware? I think, yeah. For those that don't know, ransomware is where an attacker basically holds your data hostage. They attack a device, they hold it hostage till you pay a ransom. And we're going to talk some more about that. Let's look at some of the attacks that we have seen. So we see that there's a trend towards more destructive attacks, okay? I'll kind of highlight a couple of these. I'm not going to go through all of them. Shamoon. Okay, that happened in 2012, okay, about 7 years ago. That was probably one of the most devastating initial attacks that happened in the industry. And let me tell you what that was. So Shamoon was basically, it was an attack on Saudi Aramco. That's one of the largest oil refineries in the world, based in Saudi Arabia. And let me paint a picture for you of how this worked, okay? I'm an IT professional sitting at my desk at Saudi Aramco. I get an email that looks like it's from a friend that says, hey, take a look at this link. It's really cool. And I unknowingly click on that link. And as I click on that link, what happened in this particular attack, there was an American flag that came up in a video, and you're seeing this flag, and as the video is playing, it's starting to burn the flag. Over this course of about less than a minute, that malware propagated to 30,000 PCs in the organization, and essentially it overwrote the master boot record, which is sort of your map for finding things on your disk drive, and basically rendered 30,000 devices unusable at that point in time. In fact, it took weeks for Saudi Aramco to recover from that. They had to go and reinstall the operating system on each of those devices. Very devastating. Now fast forward, and what we're seeing is attacks, from, let's say, WannaCry, Petya, not Petya, Bad Rabbit. Those are attacks that are ransomware attacks. And ransomware attacks are definitely becoming more prominent in the industry. In August of this year, several months back, 60 Minutes ran a segment on ransomware. It's really interesting. You guys can find the link out there. And what it talked about is that municipalities, governments in the US are being targeted by ransomware. And why is that? A lot of times these places don't have security as their priority, and they're open and vulnerable to these attacks. Now what's was interesting about two of the attacks that they brought up, one of them was based in Leeds, Alabama. Does anybody know Leeds, Alabama? I've never heard of it, but it's a small town of about a couple thousand people. It got attacked. The hackers wanted $50,000 to $60,000 to give them their data back. And this is what I thought was unique. The mayor responded to them and said, hey dudes, you guys are dealing with a very small town. We don't have that kind of money. We can pay you $8,000. The hacker said, fine, give it to us. And they successfully got their data back for $8,000. Okay, so then there was another example that wasn't so good. This was Atlanta, and I think this was in the media. You guys probably saw this. Atlanta got, their systems were brought to a halt. The 911 systems were brought to a halt. And Atlanta said, nope, we're not going to pay the ransom. We're not going to encourage this type of attacks. Well, the ransomware attackers wanted, what, $50,000? About $50,000. It ended up costing about $20+ million for Atlanta to recover their data. Okay? So sometimes these things work out and sometimes they don't. But those are the destructive attacks that we're seeing in the marketplace. Now, some of those are, I'll talk a little bit more that I skipped over and get going. So what are the risks of IoTs? So first we need to talk about what are IoTs? Okay, most of you probably already know. IoTs are compute devices essentially that are on the internet, they're connected to the network, and they're collecting data and typically sending it out to a web server, external cloud web server, so that you can run apps on your phone. Nest thermostats are a good example, right? Nest thermostats allow you to control the thermostat remotely, so as you're going home in the evening, you can turn on the air conditioner or the heat, whatever it may be. Surveillance cameras, doorbell cameras, smart refrigerators, lots of those. Those are IoTs. Historically, printers are one of probably the most common IoTs that's been in your environment. But what happens is these devices can be used for distributed denial of service attacks. And what that means is that the hackers are essentially attacking these IoTs and using them as botnets. And a botnet is something that you essentially have you've attacked the device and you own it, and you can make it do whatever you want. And it gives you the ability to attack at scale with these botnets. Why is this happening? IoT device manufacturers have not made security a priority in many instances. And to be honest, time to market is critical for a lot of these vendors, right? The door surveillance cameras or the doorbell cameras, those are really hot items that people like to have so that they can see who's coming to their door. And so time to market is critical, and then there's also cost concerns. Now, let's talk about the mechanics of why these are easy targets. Okay, what do we see on IoTs? So there's security flaws that plague these devices. And by the way, there's security flaws in most devices that are sold out there, but the IoTs have become a higher level of target at this point in time, just because they're trying to get them out there. Security is not a priority. Default passwords are an issue. What are default passwords? That means that A, the device doesn't have a password, or B, which is just as bad, the manufacturer puts the same password on every device, which is not good either, or it's got an easily guessable password, like, you would be surprised how many people set their password to password. Password 1, 2, 3, password 4, whatever. So you've got it, these are the reason why these devices are being targeted. Misconfigured devices can occur where protocols are left on or ports are left open. Software vulnerabilities exist, and I think, as we'll learn, software vulnerabilities exist in almost any device. It's just a matter of time and effort to find those. And what's worse in some instances is that last bullet around lack of automatic software updates. So, if you've got a surveillance camera or a doorbell camera, how often do you update that? Probably never, right? And so these manufacturers need to provide a way to automatically update that. And that's become quite clear. There's legislation going through in the UK as well as the European Union to force manufacturers to do some of these things to fix these problems. So let's talk about what the attacks are using these IoTs. This year, Black Hat, that's a conference that is actually for ethical hackers and manufacturers to get together and talk about what are the attacks. In this particular instance, this is Microsoft actually found issues, and they wanted to make sure that they highlighted that these IoTs are being used to attack enterprises and small, medium businesses, okay? And it gives the attackers a foothold into the environment. So using these devices is risky. I highlighted at the bottom, I know you can't see it in the back, but I'll repeat it. Passwords for these devices were easily guessable, default ones, which we just talked about. And the device was running old firmware that had known vulnerabilities. I've talked to hackers as part of the bug bounty program, and what I like to do is learn their methodologies. And one of the things that the hackers do, they go out and Google search for known vulnerabilities in firmware or software for these devices. And you would be amazed at the number of devices out there that are not updated. So they can use these known vulnerabilities to attack in these devices and then gain a foothold into the enterprise environment and then propagate through the network, attacking other devices. And Microsoft saw this. And so they did come out with a set of best practices, recommendations. I highlighted 3 of these. One is ensure a configuration policy for each IoT device. So that means you better know what the settings are on these devices, when you install them on your network. The other one is isolating IoT devices from other devices on the network, because a lot of these enterprise customers know these are a high risk. I'm going to isolate them from the rest of my servers and PCs, the endpoints, and sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But again, we're talking about putting layers of protections in and providing a defense in depth mechanism. And then the last one is around monitoring these devices for abnormal behavior. And I'll touch on what that means on some of the technologies that you can put into IoT devices to protect them even further. So let's look at Mirai. This was an attack that happened in 2016. This was a distributed denial of service that happened on the eastern seaboard. And basically it infected 2.5 million IoT devices. It caused the disruption of the internet service, so you couldn't get to your favorite website, Amazon, Netflix. It used DVRs, security cameras, and printers. And it worked in 3 stages. The 3 stages, they found vulnerable devices with unconfigured devices. You guys see a common theme here? Yep. Passwords not configured. Injects malware into the devices using insecure protocols, Secure Shell and Telnet. And then they created these botnets that would essentially overload the DNS servers on the eastern seaboard, because every one of these 2.5 million devices were continually sending DNS packets. What are DNS packets? Those are packets that take your name, Amazon.com, and translate that into an IP address so you can communicate with it. And essentially, you could not get to your websites because of that particular attack. So again, using these devices at scale to wage attacks. So the other thing I wanted to highlight is there are tools out there, tools designed, developed by hackers and sold to hackers. And the one that we see used quite a bit, it's called Shodan. This is actually a free tool on the internet. You can go out and utilize it. And what it does is it actually discovers IoT devices that don't have passwords on them. You can go out and find printers It can go out and find other types of devices. And the other thing that it's doing is it's finding these devices that may not be configured behind a firewall. And this is critical because firewalls can provide some level of protection. Do they protect against everything? Is a border device like a firewall sufficient these days? No. In fact, any cybersecurity expert will tell you firewalls are porous. And the reason is because you can get into the network in other ways, right? How many of you guys have had were subjected to phishing attacks where you got an email and it looked like it came from someone you knew, and you look at it and you go, no, this is not right. Well, you know, in the past, a lot of people clicked on those links, and once they do that, that malware installs on the PC, and it's now in your network. What good's the firewall at that point, right? You're now on the device. So there's kind of 3 ingredients that I put on here around what is happening today for these attacks. Default passwords, you know, allow entry to the device. So what can you do? Set unique passwords on these devices. Not patching with the latest security fixes, right? These are, you know, these hackers are looking for known vulnerabilities on those devices. So make sure you have automatic updates turned on. They should be turned on by default, but some manufacturers want you to enable them, and some manufacturers may not even offer it. But, you know, check that before you actually buy a product. And then there are tools available that can easily discover those devices. And again, it's, hey, make sure your firewall is adequately configured. There are a lot of, you can go out and there's like 50,000 printers exposed on the public internet using the Shodan tool. And some of them, what's interesting is there were some from the DoD, so we know that the DoD purposely put those out there as honeypots to draw the hackers in to see how they're attacking. But there are a lot of printers that are just on the public internet because the firewall isn't configured properly, or, you know, people just aren't sure how they're doing this. So ensure the device is behind the firewall. Okay, so let's talk about you know, how you can protect yourself. And this is more of the purchasing of cyber resilient IoTs and what those are. I'm going to give you a definition of what is a cyber resilient IoT. Before we do that, I wanted to kind of go through what are the mechanics of an attack here. I get asked this question a lot. How are these attackers getting into these devices? The first one I've got is the one that is probably the most worrisome for me. This is what keeps me up at night for our printers. This is not a good one. Buffer overflow. So what is a buffer overflow? Anybody know what okay, a couple people. So you have interfaces on your device, okay? These are what you communicate with. And if the manufacturer hasn't adequately tested those interfaces for unexpected input, you can have what's called a buffer overflow. So if I'm expecting a 15-character string, and an attacker figures out a way to send me a 30-character string, and I haven't validated that, I now am essentially overflowing the buffer, and in a lot of instances, the device just pauses in memory. And this is where you get to the second one that's here, code injection. Because the device is paused in memory, you could inject all the code you want, jump tos, procedures, methods, whatever the case may be, and you now have an attack on the device. And essentially that malware owns the device. There's other ways to do this, code flaws, misconfiguration of the device, just, you know, general defects. Any general defect in a product could potentially be used as an attack vector by the hackers. And then we've got, you know, the USB-based attack. That's where someone, you know, will leave a USB key on your desk or put them out in the parking lot. I don't think this happens as prominent as it used to be. People would pick it up and try to look, oh, I wonder who this is so I can get it back to them. And then they might click on one of the files in there, an executable that now has just installed malware onto the device. And then human exploits, phishing email, still an issue. A lot of the enterprises have lures that they put out there to their employees that says, hey, click on this, you know, this link, and you'd be amazed the number of people that in an enterprise environment where they're trained not to do that will do that. It's just, I think it's human nature. You can't help yourself. But I wanted to highlight one thing here. This is kind of showing the 3 areas of an attack. There's the user space applications. Those would be like your office applications. The operating system side, and you can attack the operating system, which would be Linux or Windows or whatever that may be, and then the BIOS, and this is what we talked about earlier. Now, the lower you go in this stack, the more difficult it is to attack, but there's a flip side to it as well. It's more difficult to attack because it takes more expertise and resources, but once you attack it, you own the device. You have privilege levels if you attack the BIOS, you've got privilege levels of an administrator within the device, the highest privilege level that you can get. So definitely, those are some of the things to worry about. Now, I mentioned cyber resiliency. What is cyber resiliency? So there is a spec out there down at the bottom here. NIST 800-193 talks about platform resiliency. It's actually a good read. HP contributed to it. It's the National Institute of Standards and Technology, published that recently. And it talks about what it means to be cyber resilient as a platform. Very good reading. And the concept is around protect, detect, and recover. Protect everything that you can on the device, but recognizing you cannot protect against everything. And I'll get into an example of where we've seen this at HP. You cannot protect against everything. You need to make sure that you have detection capabilities that are looking for abnormal behavior, okay? Abnormal behavior that may be indicative of an attack, and then recover to a state. So that Shamoon attack, where the 30,000 devices were inoperable at that point in time, that would be where something like this type of model would have worked. And I'll share some technology we did. Now, I keep mentioning that you can't protect against everything, right? No one can claim they've got a completely secure device. About a year ago, we had a company in Israel that found a vulnerability in our fax interface. And it was presented at Black Hat, the conference in Las Vegas. And basically, they spent 2 years with 2 engineers looking for that vulnerability. They had a lot of misses and didn't get it. But it took them 2 years to find it. They wanted to find, a vulnerability in, printers, our HP printers leaders in the marketplace, and they wanted to do it for fax because you can access a fax just by knowing the phone number, right? And they found it. So with enough time, resources, and expertise, they will find a vulnerability. And that vulnerability had been in there for 15 plus years. So it's all about protect, detect, and recover. Software security is not enough, and you must start from the hardware up. And I notice some people are trying to see that number. It's NIST 800-193. You can Google search for that, and you'll find it. Okay. So let me kind of start with a cyber resiliency success story. HP, I'm going to shamelessly plug HP printers here, okay? But it does apply to IoT devices. So we came out with the world's most secure printers back in 2015. How did we do this? We basically have been driving towards security leadership and it took us quite a few years to get there. It's not an easy thing to do. This is a complex topic to protect, detect, and recover. And what I want to do is highlight, there's 2 parts to this. There's the initial startup of the device, and then there's the ongoing aspect of it. Initial startup, the first thing that runs is the BIOS, right? Well, guess what? You got to make sure that you know what you're loading on that device. And I'll touch on what's important about how you check and validate that on an IoT. Security defaults, you want to make sure that that device comes out as secure as possible. Those insecure protocols should be turned off and not even accessible. Whitelisting, this is the benefit of having an embedded device. You can actually validate the code came from the manufacturer. And then this ongoing behavioral stuff is important as well. So this gets into the detection aspect of it, runtime intrusion detection. So scanning memory for anomalies, looking for potential intrusion. Policy-based compliance, ensuring those devices are set up and configured adequately on the network. And then network behavioral anomaly detection, looking for anomalies in those packets that the device is emitting. So a device can monitor its own network packets to know what it's sending and use that data to identify whether there's a risk. And then monitoring for real-time events, and then automatic update across the bottom. Christian Slater was used to do some wolf videos for us, and you can go onto YouTube and find these videos if you're interested. But what I'm going to highlight now is some of the attacks that are out there, and how you can protect against them. I think that's really important. So at a recent conference, Black Hat conference, there was a critical vulnerability that was found in the BIOS, and these were hardware drivers. In this particular case, the researcher found a common design flaw within hardware device drivers. It was on Huawei, Intel, NVIDIA, and the list goes on. 20 hardware vendors were affected, and one of the things, we have what's called HP Sure Start on our devices, and that would protect against this type of attack, and I'll touch on what that is in a second. LoJax was a malicious attack on BIOS code that can be prevented. So let's talk about what are the capabilities. Secure boot, root of trust. What is that? You know, it sounds somewhat technical. Secure boot, root of trust is essentially where you prevent rootkits from running on the device. So what is the first thing that loads? What I'm showing here is you want to make sure as a manufacturer you know what's going to launch on that device when it's power cycled. You can do this, and this is how most manufacturers do this, and you know, you actually have a bootloader in ROM that has a public key, and that public key is used to validate all of the rest of the code that you're going to load. And so before you load that BIOS, to make sure it's not been compromised, you want to check the signature on that, the hash, and make sure it was signed by the manufacturer. HP does that so that you can prevent rootkits from exposing your device, and the bootloader code validates the BIOS signature. So before it loads that BIOS, it checks the signature. And then the next one, we're going to, whoops, sorry, went too far. So this next one is around protection and detection. So we just talked about secure boot, root of trust. We're going to talk about secure defaults and whitelisting and what you can do to protect that. This is just an example of what our printers have done. You want to reduce the attack surface on devices, turn off those protocols, turn off those weak cipher suites, TLS 1.0, 1.1. You might ask, well, why don't you just remove those if they're not secure? So there are some companies in China that are still using Windows XP, and those needed TLS 1.0 and 1.1. So anyway, sometimes customers need it, but let's disable it. So the ones that need it, they just enable it. So it's just, and it's turning these weak cipher suites, encryption algorithms, turn them off, and then enable by default the best security that you can, so that if someone tries to brute force the password, tries to guess it, you lock them out for a period of time. So it takes them, essentially 100 years to actually guess the password, assuming it's a complex password with, numbers, a minimal length of 8 characters, and it's got uppercase, lowercase, and a special character. That's what's mostly required these days when you go on and set a password, which is good. The whitelisting I wanted to highlight. This is the if you look at PCs, they're open systems. You can load any application you want. It's not limited, right? Embedded devices, or IoTs, we know what code should be running on those. And so we call this a whitelist, so that you only load code that's been signed by a trusted signature. It might just be the manufacturer, so that you only load that code that should be running on that device. And then, okay, we're moving right along. I wanted to show another botnet attack that occurred. This is Reaper. This had infected many devices. It was difficult to find it. And it used security flaws in IoT devices to attack. These were the surveillance cameras and routers. And this sort of highlights where most consumers don't update their devices with the latest patches. This is really important. But what I really wanted to highlight is that this is a finding. Infected IoTs communicate with their command and control server. So what does that mean? So if I'm a hacker, I've just attacked your device. In a lot of instances, what I will do is call my command and control server and say, what do you want me to do next? You might download a new version of the malware that just got installed. You might tell it to analyze what else is on the network, what are you close to, what other devices are out there, and then start attacking some of those devices as well. So millions of devices were attacked, and I do want to highlight this next topic, network behavioral anomaly detection. So this is, again, looking at packets that are going out on the network. So infected IoT devices need to communicate with those servers, their servers, So how can we detect this on IoT devices? There's two ways to do it, okay? And I'm going to share both ways. One, and you might use both ways, right? Talking about a defense in depth mechanism. So you would have a set of well-defined servers that those devices will communicate with. So if you've got Nest thermostat, does that Nest thermostat need to go out to different websites and do things? No, it only needs to go to the Nest cloud server, right? So Nest can actually make sure I am only going to allow my device to go out to the approved server list, okay? So you can put protections in there. Or on the bottom, this is where network behavioral anomaly detection comes into play. You're looking for patterns that are out of the ordinary, okay? And let me explain that. Let me go to the next slide that highlights how this works on our devices. So we had an HP researcher in our lab in Bristol was looking at installing malware, and they noticed that most of the time the first thing the malware does is call home to its command and control server. And when the malware does that, it sends out a bunch of DNS packets, because what happens on the internet, ISPs, when they detect a malicious website, shut that down, then you can't get to it. So what needs to happen is the malware goes through this algorithm and will send out 100 DNS packets to find its server until it gets a hit. So what we added to our devices is that we look to see, hey, are we connecting out and are we sending more than a couple of DNS packets? If we start seeing an increase in DNS packets, we essentially assume, hey, I think we've been attacked, and we go through a reboot, flushing memory of that attack and coming back up into a safe state. So that is what's called network behavioral anomaly detection in the industry, looking for out of the ordinary network traffic that could be indicative of an attack. In this particular case, we embedded that in our devices. Sometimes that type of behavior is actually in routers and switches in the industry. So there's another ongoing detection capability I sort of alluded to. This is an on-device, in-memory scanning for injected malware. So again, this is on the device. Malware can be injected into the device via buffer overflows, as we talked about earlier. So how do you detect that? Runtime intrusion detection is a mechanism where you can scan memory. You're scanning memory to see, hey, has the code that I loaded changed? Because you can hash it. You can hash that code and say, gee, has it changed? And if it has, I might be under attack. And then you go through a reboot, flushing memory of the attack and coming up in a safe state. So one thing that you can look at is these devices that you may have. Do you ever power cycle them? That's actually a method to clear the memory of potential attacks that may be on your device. Periodically power cycle those devices, if you can. So this is just showing a little bit more detail about how it works. You've got this intrusion detection technology that's sitting there scanning the in-memory firmware, looking for any types of anomalies that would be indicative of an attack. And then if you find that, self-heal the device at that point in time. So we've been talking about protections on the device. Now I'm going to switch to what protections you can have off device. And there's one that was brought up earlier by Microsoft that we're going to touch on. So an IoT device security is about two things. The first, secure those IoTs, secure those devices, right? Make sure that the device is built with security standards at a minimum. You can go and look at that NIST 800-193 specification. And then offer state-of-the-art technology for securing the device. It's about defense in depth. There's no one thing that really protects against everything. It's putting layers of protection in these devices. The second thing that's needed is security monitoring and management so that you can assess the security posture of these devices on an ongoing basis. Okay? You can monitor these devices and ensure they're in compliance with the settings. And then, and this sort of gets into the compliance tools. Devices not configured securely when installed, or admins or clients make changes to them and you don't know that, just trying to fix problems on them. They may open ports or protocols. So how to detect that? Ongoing monitoring of configuration settings on these devices to ensure they're in compliance. And then I'm getting to my last slide. So this is an example of a policy-based monitoring and management tool. is essentially going out. You can create a policy in an enterprise environment. Some managed SMBs, small, medium businesses use this as well. But it discovers devices, it can assess a device and remediate a device, and then you can review the results. And this is a tool that we actually have at HP. And with that, I'm going to say thank you for listening.